Hello out there, and today we are going to be making the definitive list of rankings for the knives in my budget blade series. So going through and basically just letting you know which ones are my favorites, which ones have the opportunity to be a little bit better. And if you aren't aware already of the budget blade series, it's a group of knife reviews that I have put into a playlist. I will well, not really link to it. It's there on the channel, so check it out on my channel. There's a bunch of knife reviews of budget knives that I've picked up in the past year or so. And yeah, what I want to do today is just sort of let you know which ones are the best of the best and which ones might not be the best value compared to all these others. Right, and the budget blade series is ongoing. It's not going to stop. All the knives that are on here today are sub $30 because that's what I consider to be a budget knife still. That doesn't mean that anything over $30 is expensive or it can't be economical, but it isn't what I consider to be a budget knife. So for those of you who might be looking for the CJRB RIA, which I've reviewed and thought very highly of recently, that's not going to be on here. For those of you who might be looking for other things, the Kershaw Decibel, which is a knife that I really like, but it's a $40 knife. So while it might still be very affordable to a lot of people, it's not really what I consider to be a budget knife anymore. Sub $30, what can you do for me? How good of a knife can you produce, mass produce, for that inexpensive amount of money? And so that's what we're going to go through today. And then what's going to be fun is at the end, off the cuff, I'll sort of bring in some of the older knives from my collection that would have fit into this budget category, older budget knives from before I started this series. But for the sake of the ranking, I want it to be a bunch of knives that are like newish, readily available, still in production, that sort of thing. And so we're going to get started right now with this one right here. This is the 511 Inceptor Curia. And the reason why we're starting with this is that we are going to bounce around a little bit today, guys, but I want to start with a knife that is the baseline, all right? And this is the knife that anything that is above this is pretty darn good, and anything that is below this is a little bit on the iffy side. And the good news is that most of the knives on this list are going to be above this. But this is a solid EDC. This is a knife that I got at a 511 store. I walked in and picked it out. I saw it. I liked it. I think I paid $28, $29 in store, but online this is 25 bucks. And you can see there's some aspects of it, in terms of like clip position or this like flipper that's not actually a flipper. Some quirks that maybe show you that it is a budget knife with maybe not the most thought out design, but all of the real important aspects of the knife they got right. The lockup is good. The grind on the blade is really good. I believe this is AUS-8 blade steel. The ergos are actually pretty solid, even though there are these couple dips. They are useful, and yeah, it feels pretty good in hand. The scale is a nice color. I know, and that's really not functionally important, but it does, look a little bit different than all the blues that are out there. So it does have its own unique characteristics. And yeah, I like this knife a lot. Really glad I picked it up. And it is, again, sort of mediocre compared to some of the other ones in here, but it is very heartwarming. I don't know if heartwarming is a word, but it is encouraging, let's say, to think that people who aren't really knife people might walk into a 511 store and buy a knife that's going to be like their main EDC, and it's actually a pretty darn good quality piece. So, starting with that. The next one that we're going to get into, and again, we're just sort of going in random order here. The next one is the most recent knife that I reviewed, and this is the QSP Penguin, and this one is in D2 steel. Wharncliffe blade, it is, there's a lot of Wharncliffes right now, guys, so that didn't knock my socks off, but the scales here are just remarkable. They're so cool, and the action on the knife, it's decent. I've heard recently, since I did that review, that a lot of people have Penguins that have different types of washers than mine, and so they have some that drop shut. Mine doesn't, but all in all, it's still a pretty darn good knife, right around the $30 price point. So yeah, I do like this one a lot. It's built well. There aren't a lot of things to complain about when it comes to this knife, and the scales, like I said in my review, give you the feeling of value that really elevates it far above what you actually pay for it. All right, the next one. So let's sort of hop down a little bit. And this is a Ganzo. This is the Ganzo FH41, I believe. And this is a really, really well-made knife. Ganzo with the FH line, for the most part, has built high-quality knives. And it's hard to argue with that you're getting D2 steel and really nice action for less than $30. This is not my favorite design, and for the most part, that's why it's going to be where it is on the list and not closer to the top. But functionally, there's really nothing to complain about here. And while the QSP that we just looked at has the nicest scales of anything in this whole group, this Ganzo is definitely second. It's a very nice G10, and I like a matte G10 for the classiness look of it, but also the traction for if you're actually using your knives. So yeah, this is one that, I don't know, maybe I'm just maybe I'm wrong that it's just not my favorite, but maybe it should be, because there really isn't much bad to say about this, but there is more to come from Ganzo in this group. All right, actually, more to come from Ganzo. Let's just stick with Ganzo right now. We're gonna hop down, and here's the FH11. And this is one from Ganzo that, again, it's pretty well built, but I just don't like the knife. And this is one of those knives that I don't like, so I abuse, and so you can see it's scratched and beat up. And this one, it did have just a little bit of rock that I couldn't get out. I mean, it's minute, so it wasn't a deal breaker, but this knife just isn't good in hand. It's just sharp. There's hot spots. I didn't care for a lot of the design decisions on this knife, even though there are some really good qualities. And this did kick off the FH line, which has just been really, really successful for them. And so there is that, but I think that Ganzo overall can do a whole lot better than this. So yeah, we have that. Now let's hop pretty far up. So this one is an interesting one. Here's the CRKTP. Whenever we talk about budget and these budget blades here, guys, you know what? It's always, like I've already said in this video, bang for the buck. Like, what can you get? What's the value? And so what we always tend to gravitate towards is thinking, all right, well, I have D2 for less than $30, or I have G10 or denim micarta for less than $30, or I have bearings for less than $30. This knife doesn't do any of that. It doesn't give you D2. It doesn't give you G10. It doesn't give you bearings. It just gives you a knife that performs. And I'm trying to remember the phrase that I used in my review. I think I said something to the effect that the peat just is the best expression of these materials that you could ask for. That it doesn't need to be any better than it is. That, like, yeah, you can knock on plastic scales and say that, like, G10 is going to be better than plastic, and I'm not going to argue with that, not for a second. But what I am going to say is that this plastic is as good as you could ask for. And so when I hold this knife in my hands, I don't have a single issue with it. Is this one that, you know, you sort of hope to see a Blade HQ variation of, with like D2 and maybe something, the way that they tend to get those CRKTs? Yeah, honestly, just because I think this knife deserves more attention, and I think the people who write it off for having these like lower quality materials, I think those people are mistaken, and maybe the upgrade would draw more attention to it. But for me, I'm glad I didn't write it off, because this is one of the very best, at least one of my favorite knives in this entire group. So it is going pretty close to the top. All right, let's move over to a Kershaw. Here's the Kershaw Tar Heel. And the Tar Heel here is, I don't even know how I came across this knife, guys. I think I was on Amazon just dicking around, and I happened to come across it, or maybe I saw a picture somewhere, but this is like a $15 knife. And it's not special. There's nothing special about it, but it's sort of similar to this guy. One of those knives that if you see a person who's not a knife person carrying it, then they're carrying a lot better knife than most non-knife people do, if that makes sense. You know, it's 8CR13 MOV. The D10 on this knife is pretty nice, so the action with these thumb studs is pretty spot on. So it's fun to actuate. It's sort of a good little like beefy EDC, and I compare it actually, like, let me see if I have one right here. I do. Okay, I actually compare it just in my head to the Tenacious. And it's not the Tenacious. I mean, it doesn't have G10 and yada yada. You know, like it's not as good a knife as the Tenacious, but it could compete. It could compete for your money. 8CR13 MOV, $15, $40 to $50 now. Do you know what I mean? And so even, you know, the Tenacious Lightweight, which is plastic scales, is going to be right around $40 with the same steel. So again, we're not going to get into the heat treat kind of debate with that crap or any of it. But what I'm getting at here is that this is just extreme budget. And so the value, $15 is just a lot. You know, there's a lot of value here. And this is definitely not one of my favorites on this list. But there is a lot to say that, you know, like $30 does leave a lot of room for debate in these categories, because a $29 knife versus a $15 knife, you're talking about twice the price. And while this might be a knife that's twice as good as the Tar Heel, who knows? You know, who really knows? And if you're someone who only has $20 to spend on a knife, you know, the value here is definitely there. So this one is sort of going to be right in line with that 511. I'm going to put it a little bit below, but overall, it's a pretty darn good knife. All right, let's skip up. Actually, we're gonna skip down. I have two knives on this list from Lost Pine Supply Company. And these were knives that were sent to the channel and have been given away and are headed to their new homes probably by now, by the time you watch this. So that's good. But these knives are their first co-branded knives. I enjoyed getting the opportunity to check them out. They are pretty interesting designs with some really nice G10, and they are very strong and well made. So if when you're looking for a budget knife, you're looking for a beater, you know, a real beater that's going to sort of stand up, this might be a good one for you. But just in terms of the rest of the qualities, in terms of like the clip and the you know, some of the, like the thickness and the finishing and then the weight of the knives, they really don't compare to the other ones particularly well. Now, the Cactus here is the name of this knife, and this one was my favorite of the two. We will get into the other one in just a little bit, but it is a decent knife, but it is in like the 6-ounce range, 6.5, I think. I'm sort of spitballing right here, trying to remember. Again, not a bad knife, just not really competitive with the other things that you're going to see on this list, especially seeing that it is at the high point of this price range. I think you might be able to find these designs contracted from other companies for a lot cheaper as well. So if you want them and you look for them, I'm sure you can hunt them down. And actually, we'll just push into the other Lost Pines knife, the Ilex, quickly show you that. This one is right here. Again, there's a lot of appeal in the attractive look to them. And actually, you know what it was? I finally remembered where I thought I saw this. This looks like a Serge Panchenko design. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's a Serge design that looks a lot like this. But anyway, so this one is just a heavy tank, and again, it almost deserves its own category just because, yeah, it's budget, but it also sort of fits different philosophies than these other knives just because of how heavy it is and how overbuilt it is. Again, this is a list of preference, so this one is going to be at the bottom. We've only got a few left here. Let's jump to this knife right here. Maybe a forgotten one. I don't know what's going on with Rake, all right? I'll just come right out and say that. Rake releases some really good knives, and then it seems like in terms of social media and marketing, they just disappear off the face of the earth. And I got this knife last year, and I really liked it. Really liked it. It's a beautiful knife. Even though I'm not a bead blast fan, just the finish on this blade looks good. 14C28N, so you do have that upgrade from 8CR, and you're still in that sub $30 price point. It is a small looking knife. You take a look at it like this, but it is actually, in terms of cutting edge, a larger knife than the mini grip. There's just, you know, with this flat line here, there's just this choke up and no ramp, so it's going to disappear in your hand a little bit more. So certainly not a heavy duty kind of EDC, but it is good for a lot of stuff, guys, and it's a pretty one. I really, really love this blade shape. The action on it is good, even though it is that thumb stud only on like that for right-hand deployment, like we've seen with a number of CJRBs. It does flick open really nicely, spider flicking left-handed. The detent is very good. A good quality build on this knife, and G10. So, and it's good medium traction G10, and arguably among the most attractive just lines of a knife in this group. All right, only got 2 left, and they're 2 of the top ones. And I feel like some of you are going to shit on this. But here's the Kershaw Airlock. And the reason why I think some of you are going to shit on this is that with all the good knives that we have here, one of the best ones, at least in my opinion, one of my favorites, is in the cheapest steel that is on this list, 4CR14. But guys, if you get this knife and you work with it and you use it, hopefully you'll understand it the way that I do, because this thing, it just cuts. I mean, it blew me away in terms of value performance-wise. You know, assisted opening, which I know it's not one of those things that screams high quality and anti-budget, but it is a budget knife, and it's not trying to be anything else. And it came out really good. I mean, Kershaw did a great job with a lot of these design implements. One of the things I really like about it is that we have this jimping, and while it might not be the most perfect jimping, take a look at how that jimping terminates. It terminates on a rise, right? So it rises up into this wedge, so that even though the jimping might not grip your thumb perfectly every time, you do have that like ending spot to it, and that's fantastic. Not a lot of jimping does that. The plastic scales are comfortable. Ergonomically, it's just really good in hand for a lot of reasons. The action is pretty snappy in terms of that speed safe assisted opening, but more than anything, guys, it's just thin. It's just thin, and it cuts and it cuts and it cuts. And if you have time, if you're interested in this one, definitely watch my video, because the amount of time that I put into testing this was a lot. I put a lot more time into this video than any of the other videos on this list, mostly because I really wanted to sort of evaluate if a knife with this budget of a steel could be purposeful, could be something that I shouldn't overlook in the future, because whenever Kershaw comes out with those starter series knives, and this is one of those, I just sort of it's almost too budget for me, because it seems like they're not trying. But in this case, they used an extremely budget steel, but they put it together with a package that doesn't feel like it's a cheap piece of crap, and this thing performed. So this goes pretty close to the top. And all that leaves us with is one. And if you watched my top 10 knives of the year video last year, you might already know what it is. This knife, I'm not going to say it blows everything else away that's on this list, but it is on a level that's really hard to compete with. And this is the Ganzo FH71. Now, before we get too far into this, I'll say my piece about Ganzo. I had some reservations about them for a long time. As a company, I still sort of do, because I don't know what their direction is going to be and if the copying of designs is really come to a close. But this being an original knife from them, it's great. I really don't know really don't know how else to judge them than by saying that, hey, they did it right. They knocked it out of the park. The action on this is fantastic. The steel, it's D2. Whether it's the best D2 or not, does it really matter to me the way that I use it? No, it hasn't. I've used this knife a lot. It's performed. The lockup is great. The lines are... This is the best looking blade, I think, in this entire group. And that's what matters to me. And honestly, that's why it is above, this other one here. And let's see. Actually, let's bring this Rake back, because it is almost, not dissimilar from that. But yeah, it's the best looking blade in the whole group. Ergonomically, it's absolutely fantastic. The G10 is great. And I mean, this is all stuff that you're getting for 25 bucks. So, I have a lot of appreciation for this knife and what they were able to do at that budget of a price point. So this one for me is the hands down winner. There are a couple others that might be close, but really it hasn't been a comparison yet. There hasn't been anything that I have come across sub $30 that has rivaled this knife yet. All right. So that's where we are. Those are the knives of the Budget Blade series. Let's take a look at some other knives though, some other budget knives that I have lying around right now that I've maybe reviewed on the channel, talked about very highly. And let's sort of just spitball and talk about where those might fit in this group. That one, huh? And actually, before we do that, I do have two budget knives I'm going to have reviews coming with very soon. And these are from SRM, the company formerly known as San Renmu. So a couple axis lock knives that I've been using and testing out. Reviews on these coming soon. I'm not going to spoil and tell you where they might go in the group because honestly I don't know yet. But they're pretty good and they're pretty cool. So we'll get back to that. But yeah, let's take a look at these four, right? So we have the Kershaw Thistle up top. We have the Kershaw Weston, which is on paper my favorite budget knife of all time. God, it's really hard to stick with that with all the other good stuff out there. We have the CRKT Squid, and you just got to pretend that we're talking about the base squid here and not any of the upgraded ones that are over $30. Then we have the QSP Parrot. So hypothetically here, guys, I think that it's pretty safe to say that of these four knives, the one that I would sort of put at the bottom of these four is the Parrot. I like all these knives, and I really like the Parrot. I had one once before. It's a solid knife. I would put this in above the 511 Inceptor Curia. All right. The Thistle, I would put above the Ganzo FH71. Even though it's not a better quality at all, it's just a great design. And there's something about this knife that just always calls me back to it. So, and it's also like, if you can find it, it's like 12 bucks. So there's that extreme value there. The Weston, and I've been saying that Kershaws are getting better and better with their speed safe, man. But this one is just, I'm not going to say where this is going to go because I don't want to admit that this wouldn't be the top, but it'd be pretty darn close to the top. And then the squid's a classic, guys. It's so hard not to just like throw this at the top of every list just because it's just shown so much versatility, not vulnerability. It's just shown so much versatility over the years since it's come out. There are so many different variations. A lot of those variations are actually sub 30 bucks. It's a great little EDC. This model is the reason why I don't spend a lot of money on small knives, because why would I if I have a squid? You know, Spyderco Techno, don't need it. Stuff like that, you know. Don't need to spend money on a small tank because this thing is just really well built, and CRKT continues to hit home runs with this. So this one would be pretty near the top too. All right, that's really it, guys. Any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, let me know. More than that, though, if you have suggestions for what should be next in the Budget Blade series, let me know. This is by no means the end of that. This is by no means the definitive list of all time. I'm going to keep going with it and adding things and updating this because it's just a constant search trying to find the best budget blade out there. All right. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate all of you. Take care and have a good one.